Arjuna is a successful warrior. He has everything going for him. He is talented. He is handsome. He has gone to and haven't gotten a full education. He has 4 other successful brothers. He was one of the favorites of his teacher, which is a big deal. Imagine you were the favorite of your teacher who is brilliant in his skills. That would mean something. That would say a lot about you. He has a wonderful wife. He's got everything going for him. Everything that we would envision of a successful, virtuous, courageous, thoughtful, discerning, educated individual living in this world, and handsome too, talented, musical, and he's got all sides to him balanced well. You say, my God, this is a perfect man that I want to be with, that I want to get to know. What a friend, what a husband, what a wife, if that was Arjunena, the female version. So he has everything going for him. And yet still, he faced challenges. He was associated to his cousins, being the Kauravas. And because of his association, he had to undergo a certain struggle, which is not easy. He had to get exiled to the forest, which was not his own doing, but him being connected to his brothers, Yudhishthir, he had to do and share of that for himself. He watched his wife being highly disregarded and dishonored in the court, and it was not easy. So what does this show us? It shows us that you can be like Arjuna, you can be highly privileged, educated, and have everything going for you. But because we are connected to situations which we cannot avoid, we are all connected to parents, to siblings, to neighbors, to employer, to employees, to the air that we breathe. We have to share, we get to share a certain, giving, certain offering, whatever that offering is. And on top of that, we have societal, karmic, global, national layers of challenges. So if you were born in a country which doesn't have friendly relations with neighboring countries, then you will share a certain karmic trajectory because of that. Whereas if you're born just maybe 1,000 miles in a different country, just 1,000 miles away, you would not have to share that trajectory of a war or potential war or a threat, an international threat. So this means that we all get put in situations, and wherever we're put, we come with certain connections. We come with a certain nation, a certain language, a certain parents who themselves are connected to others, and all of that passes on to you. So who are you now? You are that one who has come with all of this into one package. And then on top of that, a little baby is born and you're given a name, which you and I didn't choose. Then we have to bear and carry that name for the rest of our life. We've gotten a nice label that people can relate to us with. So all of this was true for Arjuna, as is for all of us. Is anyone an exception from this? Where everything's going wonderful in your life and it's all lovely and flowers and rainbow. You wake up and your husband or wife kisses you, they love you and you love them and you cannot stop falling in love constantly. So flowers and it all smells lovely and you always feel energized, never tired, you're always productive, you never falter with any of these dharmic virtues. You are straight onto it 24/7. Huh? So this means that being born as a human being, we have to accept there's a certain empirical limitation, and this is part of maturity. In fact, maturity can be defined as accepting the world in its state, and then working with that, not just accepting. We don't want to be passive acceptors, but working with what we've given and making the best of it. So what Krishna then follows up to this fact that we all enjoy. He says to Arjuna, you cannot carry yourself as an individual or see yourself as an individual while simultaneously expecting things to go your way. It is like being a wave in the ocean. And as a wave, you are helplessly going to, maybe to different degrees, compare yourself to those surrounding waves. Because there's always a bigger, taller wave than you, isn't it? They're going to overshadow you. You're going to not be seen very much because you've got taller waves around you, bigger waves, thicker waves, more intelligent waves, more educated waves. And on top of that, this wave knows that one day it's going to hit the shore and crash, the inevitability of itself coming to an end. Thereby, as long as we remain one of those waves, one individual, and expecting life to go our way, that is a logical impossibility, because the wave is not going to be the whole thing. The wave is always going to be the wave. It's always going to be subject to surrounding waves, to crashing on the ocean, and thereby losing its center every once in a while. Thereby, what Krishna says is that the moment you change your identity from wave into water, at once you are free from the life of the wave. At once. This means I had to go through a paradigm shift. All the while the wave continues. The wave does its life, continues to exercise its duties, continues to do its little part in this world. But there is a certain freedom that you are enjoying through and through all of these wavy activities. Thereby, what Krishna says is that because this vision of who you are, which is Ananda Swarupa, your fullness, nature which is fullness, which cannot be further improved, because it is such a far-fetched vision for most people. Why is it a far-fetched vision for most people? Because let's go back to the beginning. How do we start? We open our eyes and we see a small individual who needs, and there's always these bigger adults around us. Therefore, right from the start, we develop a complex that I am not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable. There are always some better waves to compare myself against. So in other words, we develop firmly, reinforce the sense of I as an individual. And thereby, because it is so firmly implanted in the mind, understandably so, right? It becomes very difficult to go from an individual to the whole, whereby no longer are we in, this place of, I am one in this universe, but rather the whole universe is in me. That's a huge shift from me being in this universe to the whole universe being in me, including the body. Andre, who's saying this, is also in me. Shloka is 244. Yeah, this is the one we're doing. Okay. Thereby, to come to this level of ease where the knowledge is not flying over our heads. What do I mean by that? Is that when we speak the knowledge, self-knowledge, there's this notion, there's this this phenomena where it seems like you're paying attention, right? In psychology, we call it the illusion of competence. Illusion of competence is where the teacher or the presenter can be saying something very clearly, and because you're directly aligned with them in that moment, it gives you an illusion that you're simultaneously understanding what's going on. But the moment we ask a question, as I will very soon, prepare yourself, then you really kind of see where your blind spots are, okay? So this means that we have to start, bringing our thoughtfulness and our minds into whatever we're talking about. And this is the very point of Karma Yoga. So now, for whom is Karma Yoga for? What have we ascertained so far? For whom is Karma Yoga for? Would you like to answer this?
Karma Yoga is for the wave.
It's for those who have an understanding of moksha and the intent of the teaching, but haven't quite come to realize it as such yet through their own, it's like their own psychological kind of things that they need to address. Yeah.
For the individual who thinks I'm a jiva.
Good. So similar to Pankaj, it is for the wave, the one who still recognizes oneself to be a jiva, but simultaneously knows that I want to free myself from what we call jivatvam, the status of being a jiva. Moksha doesn't mean you free yourself from the jiva. I mean, the jiva is still going to be there. Jiva doesn't disappear. Otherwise, where's the teacher? He's going to speak into a ghost. So the jiva, the body, the three bodies remain. But the twam, the status of being a jiva, that goes away. The status of me being a wave, that goes away. The wave still continues for a very short amount of time. But the status of I am as good as the wave, that simply collapses. Now, to get to that place, I need a certain mental composure. I need a certain clarity of the mind. And this can be equated to, for example, those three buckets. What I need to do is have this, as we said last week, vyavasayatmika buddhi, which means, just in English, discerning mind. A mind that's thoughtful, a mind that's, able to figure things out, and it's able to capture those things so it doesn't let things fly over its head. So if we have three buckets, and suppose they're alive, the body represents the bucket and the water represents the mind, and the sun is shining on all three buckets. Now you have a muddy water bucket. Can that muddy water bucket capture the fullness and the clarity of the sun? No, but it will kind of capture a little bit, right? But it's going to be all kind of, because of the particles inside the water, it's going to be all dispersed, okay, diluted. Thereby, it's not really capable of appreciating what's the meaning that there is a light shining. There is a light shining on my particles of thoughts and so on, but there's no real kind of fascination. It's just like, yeah, light is shining. What about the bucket which has clear water, but it's wavy? Can that capture the fullness of the sun? It will capture the sun a lot more than the muddy water, won't it? But have you ever had a time where your eyes are closed and you're trying to meditate and there's constant sprinkles of light on your eyes? How annoying does that get very soon, right? So this is the kind of a mind that's able to capture quite a bit more of the sun. But at the beginning, it's sort of like little fireworks and sprinkles and there's light, but then eventually becomes quite agitating. So this is what we call Rajasic mind, as we will get to these. The first mind is called Tamasic mind, the muddy bucket. The second bucket is called the wavy bucket, is called the Rajasic mind. And the third bucket we will call the Sattvic mind, which is clear and it's relatively still. And that bucket will enjoy the fullness. It will be able to capture the fullness of the sun. It doesn't have to produce the sun. This is the crucial thing to understand. Does it have to produce the sun? Do any of the buckets have to produce the sun? What do the buckets have to do? What does the muddy bucket have to do? Does it have to go from, can it go from muddy status all the way and skip that in between, that Rajasic, and go all the way to pure and unmoving? No, it has to go step by step. It has to first clean itself up. And when it does, it's still a little bit wavy. Now, what does the wavy bucket have to do? It has to calm its mind down, change certain orientations, certain patterns, certain agitations of those 13 negative habit patterns that we talked about. All of those 13 that I put on the website, they are what produces either the muddy water or the moving water, thereby eventually getting to the Sattvic bucket. Okay, so this means that the karma yogi, I'll now bring back into one summary, recognizes specifically the world is a lovely place to fulfill my desires, and it can offer a lot, but it is only for the sake of moksha. It is only a means to an end. Before karma yoga comes into the picture, actions become an end of themselves. Enjoyment becomes an end of itself. Wealth acquisition, being a good virtuous person, becomes an end of itself. Karma yoga comes, all of those three, security, artha, kama, pleasures and delights and good food and friends and so on, and being virtuous, they are now recognized clearly. They are a means to the final end. In fact, those four purusharthas, they're called purusharthas, 4 goals that we have in the Vedas. How many actually are there? There's only, how many actually are there?
1.
Good, 1, exactly. So in other words, when we bring the implied, the lakshyartha meaning behind the implied meaning behind those 4 goals, We recognize that the three are only means by which the vehicles that deliver me to the final. And when we talk about samsara, what is samsara? It is simply taking this away and turning these into the final end. That's samsara. Okay, so karma yoga is for this purpose specifically. So yes, it is for the jiva to create a more sattvic mind. We said last session, vyavasayatmika buddhi. What kind of a mind is a sattvic mind? It enjoys more composure relative to ups and downs. That means you're not so ruffled when situations come. You remain relatively yourself. Your intellect still remains working. It doesn't lose itself. It doesn't disappear and goes nowhere. You're not so triggered anymore. And if there is a trigger, you're able to retain that discrimination. What is to be done right now? Okay. One remains in a learning mode, asking the question, what now? What does this mean? What else does this mean? What can I learn from this? What is this trying to show me? If it were to be showing me something, what is the lesson to be extracted out of this challenge right now? So a sattvic or a vyavasayatmika buddhi is able to use challenges in life to help itself turn itself from muddiness, from rippliness into that still bucket of water. Okay? Therefore, now, so Krishna is then asking a question. He's saying, what happens if you don't have this sattvic mind or vyavasayatmika buddhi? And he said specifically, these people are called avipashchits, which means non-discriminating people. That means they don't have this ability to discriminate. What is an action for? And thereby actions now become and means like the final end of life. So in other words, because of lack of this kind of a mind, this vyavasayatmika buddhi, which in modern language, by the way, just means using more of your prefrontal cortex, the newest part of your brain that's able to think, that's able to not react and able to capture every situation and give it some thought. Ask a question, and what is to be done in this moment? What am I being asked for or asked from in this moment? So that's the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain that few people use, even though it is the part that Vedanta needs a lot, okay? So this means that as long as I don't have this intellect, I will create another path in life. And what is this path? According to, except Uttara Mimamsa. Uttara Mimamsa means Advaita Vedanta. What's the other path that will be created? Karma Kanda, okay? So in other words, what happens here is that every experience becomes a means to go to heaven, a means to have a better tomorrow, a means to amplify my ego, a means to become, live a better life, means to marry my daughter to a nice husband, or to have my children be very successful in school, or to get a high college degree, or to be attractive, or to be wealthy. Now, are we saying that this is useless? Karma Kanda? No. Okay. So we're all shaking heads no. So in other words, they're just a means to an end. They were not in any point, right, putting them down. They are all required and they're wonderful. And nobody can say that I don't need money. This is all fake spirituality where one discards money, discards security, and discards relationship, all in the name of coming into, the spiritual world. Because you cannot say that all that is here is one while discarding facets of reality. Think about this. I cannot say all that is here is one manifestation of Ishvara, while has a certain section in life that I kind of don't want to deal with. What is this? It's a double standard. So this means there's no place to kind of fool ourselves here. Okay. So two paths get created. Karma Kanda, that means using actions to go to heaven or better births, and Uttara Mimamsa, which says those with Vyavasayatmika Buddhi, they use this knowledge to figure out what is my truth. That means to shift identity from wave into water. Okay. And Krishna, again, uses a very nice word here. He calls them those who use, right, who turn life into the first karma kanda. He calls them pushpitam vacham, those who speak using flowery words. So what are flowery words? Flowery words are flowery, right? How else do you describe them? They are pretty, they sound very fresh, they are very attractive. You know, are totally mesmerized by how someone speaks, and they are very poetical in nature, and they use all these metaphors, and it's all kind of riddles and elusive, but there's no substance, there's no concreteness, there's no structure, and there's no methodology. These four are missing. Okay, we need a structure. We need something to take, and I'm able to put my experiences into that model. If I don't have a model like Satya Mithya model, what's going to happen when you see an object? When you see an object and you don't have the Satya Mithya model, what are you going to do with that object? You're going to what?
Take it as truth.
Take it as an absolute. And then when you take it as an absolute, what's going to follow up then? It's going to take up all your time. It's going to become worthy of talking, comparing against other things. And this is how it is for most. In other words, as long as I see the world as an absolute, what will I do? I will take the masters of our time, you know, the 300, 250 years ago, and they will become someone who's, you know, the enlightened master. And all my effort is now going to go talking about what they have, how they're enlightened. What about you? And then comparing, you know, them against somebody else. And it just never ends. Why? Because everyone that I look at is Satyam for me, is the absolute reality for me. When you bring in the model, Satya Mithya relationship, it doesn't matter who you look at. It doesn't matter what, even yourself, you understand there is a certain ontological order of reality. Everything is resolvable ultimately into one intelligence, God. Therefore, where is the question of now giving things special status? That's enlightened, that's not enlightened, and that's good and that's bad. All that is here is one Ishvara. And this is done through or understood through that concrete methodology. In other words, lack of flowery words. Okay? So this means Krishna says that not having this discerning buddhi, the mind will try to trick itself using flowery words. You give it a microphone and say, hey, okay, give me a quick description of what is the spiritual effort about. And what would they say? Now you can improvise with me, right? You can say, oh, the spiritual effort is about connecting to your divine vision and having that soul coming to oneness with all that we are here and all hugging, you know, in this spaciousness of love where we have, you know, endlessly being here, and we're now all just kind of coming here to play and, you know, experiment, and yet we are all actually enlightened, and so there's no actual real problems here. You know, there's no teacher, there's no teaching, there's no book, there's nothing here, and there's nothing to do, there's no one to love, there's nothing to say. And you're just listening to this for a couple of minutes and you say, okay, now what do I do with that when I go home? What do I do with that when I go to the shopping mall? What do I do with that when I have to pay with the taxes? So it's all flowery, it has no substance. Okay. What are the two philosophical conclusions about the purpose of life?
Yeah, you just alluded to Purv Mimamsa. That is, you know, you're looking for doing good to get to heaven, and, you know, making your life better, doing better karma for final, you know, good to you in heaven. And
Yeah.
the other one is Uttar Mimamsa, that we are doing is Vedantic study, in which the whole aim is self-realization. Therefore, you get out of this punya, papa, and karam phal, and, you know, you are finally in the moksha.
Good. And why do you come out of this karma? Why do you come out of your, why do you come out of this cycle of rebirth? What's the logic if someone wants to give that, Gautam?
The logic is that once you realize that every, you know, you are the Brahm, everything is one, then there is, there's no self, there's no other, there are no stakes involved in any karma. So all that karma that is happening is not uh, towards self-fulfillment, and therefore there is no punya or papa getting attached to it, and therefore there is no punya papa, and therefore there is no karma phal, and when there is no karma phal, there's no rebirth.
Okay, good. Okay, what about if I restructure that and say, what, in reference to these three bodies, suppose you're a wave and the wave is made of these three bodies. When you change your identity at once, what happens to those three bodies?
They're no longer yours. Like they're
They're
just, yeah, they're not you.
Were they ever yours?
They weren't, but the jiva through beginningless ignorance mixes up the I with the three bodies.
And where does beginningless ignorance come from? Is it something that we chose to be ignorant?
No,
Where does beginningless ignorance come from? How did it come in the first place?
it didn't. It's causal body's always been there.
Excellent. I like that. You caught the question. In other words, I asked, how did ignorance come? And you said it didn't. In other words, it was always there to begin with. It never, nobody sort of just said, you're going to be ignorant and so you're going to have a fall, like we have with respect to Christianity, we have this concept of the man fell, right? It's a symbolic. The man fell down. So once upon a time, he was knowledgeable, and now suddenly he became ignorant. Now, logically, the reason why you cannot say that you were knowledgeable of who you are and then you suddenly fell into ignorance is because if you think about ignorance, what was then before ignorance? If ignorance was born, right? If you came with ignorance, then what does that imply? Before ignorance was knowledge. But can ignorance come out of knowledge?
No.
Because if you define ignorance, ignorance means absence of knowledge. So this means you cannot have absence of knowledge come out of knowledge, because knowledge means there is nothing that is missing. Everything's already known completely.
Ignorance could not be born.
Yep.
Because it came from knowledge. And thus it can't be ignorance if it's come from knowledge.
No, what I said specifically was you cannot say that ignorance was born, because to say that ignorance was born implies that it came from knowledge. But then the logical fallacy is that ignorance cannot be born from knowledge, because knowledge means absence of ignorance.
And my query was, can, in analogy form, can a knife be dulled? Something that once was sharp or once was knowledge?
The mind can be dulled, but the mind, the mind has been going through dullness and sharpness since beginningless time, but it was always a mind. So why was it always the mind? Because it saw itself as one of the many. And so therefore karma yoga is what sharpens up that knife called the mind. That's what we want. We want to sharpen up the mind, to recognize why? That I'm free of the dull and the sharp mind. Okay.
But Andre, can it also be equated to like a cloud covering the sun? Meaning sun is still shining bright, but there is maybe momentarily some covering, which is the ignorance, so-called ignorance. So the knowledge is there, but like the cloud, the ignorance comes, which is what we are trying to remove in this whole journey, right?
So see, when you say I am, it's not like you don't know who you are completely. Everyone already knows that I am a certain conscious being. No one's got doubts about that. But we don't know exactly what is the nature of this I am. So there's a confusion about it. So in that sense, no one's completely covered. It's never just totally covered the sun. There is some visibility of the sun, but I don't know exactly what is it. Am I the clouds? Am I the sun? What am I here? So now, how long have I not known the nature of who I am? That is the answer, called beginningless time. Okay. Otherwise, you and I would not be here. The only reason you and I get born is because we thought in a past life that I am as good as this doer. And a doer always is the one who is associated to karma pala, to the results of actions. And what kind of results of actions are you experiencing in this life? You're an expert at that because you already know, don't you? So whatever kind of life you have, that's the kind of results of actions that you have. Now, why do you have this life and not my life? And why do I have my life and not your life? Why were you born with certain talents and skills that your brother or sister or somebody else was not? Why were you born in your country and not in some other country? That's what we call continuity of life, because there was a doer called the Jiva who, in the previous incarnation, had their fair share of doings and sufferings and joys, and whatever they learned, whatever qualifications they earned, that is what you're enjoying right now. That's why you can have two, twins born, or brothers and sisters, same genes, same family, same opportunities, same country, same TV shows, same everything, and yet there's a vast difference in what they're both attracted to.
Okay. I was wondering, so you're born in ignorance. You have ignorance of who you are when you're born. But then can you become, as you live your existential life, can you become more ignorant?
You can become definitely, there's two kinds of ignorance. There's mula avidya and tula avidya. Mula avidya means that root ignorance of I don't know myself as Brahman. That is the root ignorance that everyone gets born with. Then tula avidya, that is the secondary kind of ignorance that can be more ignorant or less ignorant. That's why you can have two individuals, right? One of them is highly discerning, vyavasayatmika buddhi, and the other doesn't have so much discernment. And yet they're both into the spiritual path. One of them goes into fancy voodoo interests, right? The other one goes into more discernment and more self-inquiry. Okay, so in that sense, tula avidya is a secondary kind of ignorance that is depending on your mind. But both minds have mula avidya, beginningless ignorance. So what are we trying to do then here in Vedanta? We are clearing up tula avidya so that we can remove the final ignorance, which is called mula avidya, the root ignorance, the ignorance that is defining my identity to be what is not. In other words, to stop myself from seeing myself as this one small thing, one insignificant speck in this vast universe. That is the work. That is the work of the Bhagavad Gita. Otherwise, you can remove secondary ignorances all you want. But as long as the mula, the root ignorance is there, what have you really done? What have you really done in this vast scale of billions and billions of years of time? You've actually done nothing. You've just sort of, felt like you're getting somewhere, in the rat race, but actually in the vast scale, I've done absolutely nothing. So therefore, one life has to come and you say, I want to remove the secondary ignorances, that means tula avidya, okay, which about my orientations, my emotional complexions. I want to, kind of get that in order. I want to be more accommodative towards people, to recognize that I can't really change you. It's really hard to change yourself, let alone somebody else. To be more accepting of situations, to be more equanimous towards the ups and downs in life, to reorient my opinions about the world, that it's not just a world, it is now an beautifully intelligently put together world that has been operating since millennia, and even now it's operating. Therefore, this is tula avidya. It prepares me for mula avidya, removing that final root ignorance, which we call moksha.
Sorry, I'm still considering this ignorance possibility. If there's only knowledge, and that is omniscient, then that would include the creation of ignorance, no?
Ignorance, good question. Ignorance doesn't belong to a rock. Ignorance belongs to a mind. I'll show you how. So you have Brahman. Okay, that's who you are. That's all there is, the final reality. Brahman has a power. We'll just call it power for now. Okay, we'll call it power. Power to manifest. Okay, can you see this board?
Yep.
Okay. Power to manifest has two additional powers. We'll call it avarana shakti, and vikshepa shakti. Vikshepa. Okay, so avarana means veiling power. Veiling, and vikshepa means projecting power. So this one capacity to manifest infinite forms is able to project different forms. Now, when it projects different forms, what does it do? It has to hide certain information to create duality. For example, if I want to show you a oak tree, I have to hide inside that seed, I have to hide apple tree attributes. Otherwise, how are you going to have an oak tree and apple tree come together at the same time? So a pear tree has to hide an oak tree. An oak tree has to hide a pear tree. That's why you have differences. Now, when this avarana shakti is at the level of our minds, what happens? It gives birth to ignorance. Ignorance. And how does that ignorance manifest? As I don't know. Don't know. I kind of know, but I don't know entirely. I don't know how to walk. Hey, never mind mula vidya, the root ignorance. I don't know how to walk. I don't know what the mom has to teach me cookie. I don't know what 1 + 1 is. I don't know how to talk. I don't know proper manners. I don't know how to, basics of the basics, right? I don't know anything. On top of that, I don't know who I am. Because of why? Because of what? Because of avarana shakti. Now, is avarana shakti, is it ignorance, Arkiri?
It seems to me that it's both to create duality, that one part of it has had to be ignored, which was created by Brahman.
So okay, so let me refine that. So avarana shakti is a veiling power, and the function of the veiling power is to create duality. We've got a lovely world, right? A lovely world of difference. When that avarana shakti is in reference to the individual, then we call it avidya. Avidya, ignorance. So it just happens that this avarana shakti at the level of the individual produces ignorance. Now, Brahman is timeless. That's why we call it nitya. Nitya, okay? Beginningless. And therefore, since its power is also not away from Brahman, the power is also beginningless. And therefore, avarana shakti is also beginningless. And therefore, ignorance is also beginningless.
Yep.
And therefore, the jiva, because of the vikshepa shakti, the one that projects forms, is also beginningless. So you and I have been subject to these two powers since timeless, beginningless, beginning time. So this is how ignorance operates at the level of the individual. So did somebody make us ignorant? Is there some entity that's trying to make us ignorant? Ignorance itself is incidental. You can't kind of say that ignorance is real. It's only ignorance because I don't know. So the truth of this jiva is actually Brahman right now. There's only Brahman right now. So the jiva doesn't know that. Why? Because of avarana shakti. Okay? So ignorance, can you say that there is ignorance? No, there is no ignorance. But it's only incidental as a result of this power.
Does that mean too that then those things that are created in duality, like this nice world, is also that same definition of ignorance can be applied there?
In reference to non-sentient objects, we just call it differences, right? Like a pear tree is not an oak tree. Now, a pear tree is not going to say, oh, I'm ignorant. It's just enjoying itself as one potential of this infinite power.
So they're hand in hand, really. Is that the correct understanding?
Hand in hand?
They're the same thing. You can't have ignorance without duality.
So wherever there's duality, there's going to be veiling.
Yeah.
That's a better word, yeah. At the level of the individual, it becomes ignorance.
Because that which isn't veiled is given reality.
That which isn't veiled, well, everything's veiled. Everything's just one potential. Like every object is just one, A and B and C. It's all one little object. Now, B is not A, C is not B, B is not A, right? Because of avarana shakti.
Yeah.
So avarana shakti creates the differences. At the level of the individual, when that avarana shakti operates, then we say, I don't know. What is the word hello in Portuguese?
Hola.
Hola.
Okay. Good one, right? But for the rest of us who don't know, we will say, I don't know. Okay. So we have to then go and learn Portuguese to remove ignorance of Portuguese.
So
Why?
it really is a subjective term in this context.
What is the subjective term?
Ignorance.
Ignorance is,
there is ignorance, and to talk about it is to give it some semblance of truth for
yeah,
the
but that's why we say it's anirvashaniya. It's inexplicable. You cannot quite define it as an absolute real, but you also can't discard it because we don't know. That's a fact. But it's also destructible because when you do know, it is therefore removable. You can remove it. So ignorance too becomes mithya.
So the pear tree, which does actually appear as a pear tree to this, is still ignorance. Whilst it is a pear tree, it also has ignorance of apple tree, to try and use your terminology. And it's also ignorant of the reality that it is already of everything, which didn't have a beginning.
You could say that if the pear tree could kind of have a mind and say that I'm ignorant. But I would say slightly differently. The pear tree is a pear tree. It is not an oak tree. An oak tree is an oak tree. It is not an apple tree. Okay? Only at the level of the mind, when we have kind of awareness of ourselves, we say, I don't know. So it becomes a problem. Now I don't know. I have to go into the world and find out. So that means it's my job. Let's get more practical, right? Than philosophical. It's my now job being governed by coming with this avarana shakti. What's my job in the world? To manage it. So this means I can now remove avarana shakti in reference to Portuguese, in reference to animals, bird species, insects, how to speak different languages, mathematics, or I can remove the ultimate avarana shakti, which is the nature of reality.
I understand. I like how the word ignorance has the word ignore in it, because it implies that it's just being ignored, not that it's not there, or nor that it's real.
You can ignore ignorance. That's called self-denial.
No, I mean to ignore something is different than it not being real or not being known.
Right. So to ignore something is a willingness. You're ignoring for whatever reason, right? It's
Yeah,
like
not as a willing act per se, but it doesn't imply that the pear tree and the oak tree are at essence different. It implies that in seeing the oak tree, there may be, due to I forget all the words, but the one down the bottom, the subjective vision, it implies that we're ignoring the fact that it's all Brahman.
we don't know. We're not ignoring. We don't know. We're not ignoring because nobody wants to remain ignorant. Does anyone want to remain ignorant of the reality of who they are and things? Does anyone enjoy being ignorant? Nobody can stand ignorance. That's why we're looking for things in the world.
Not after coming to Bhagavad Gita class.
Yes, that's where you remove ignorance of yourself, of the nature of different terms, of the purpose of living, of everything. So this is generally the map of how and why ignorance is beginningless. So the whole point of this was, why is it beginningless? I've explained that. So we'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, just wanted to ask you one question. If the avaran goes away, the vikshepa also goes away automatically? That is one.
No. Avarana, because you don't control this. This is the capacity. It's always working in reference to the world. You can only say avidya. Avidya goes away. Avidya means ignorance about the nature of myself. That goes away. You don't remove avarana because avarana shakti still has to operate and create the world, hide things from the world.
Yeah. In my context, when the avaran shakti, in my context, that is my avidya, goes away,
right?
Then the vikshepa that is happening all around. By vikshepa, please correct me if my understanding is correct. Vikshepa is what we see as creation as jagat. That is the vikshepa. So that vikshepa automatically goes away and I find everything as one, as Brahman. Is that
No,
correct?
no, because there's something called okay. When you look at the sun and you see the sun rising, okay, and you see the sun setting, or you open your eyes and you see a flat earth. Now, are you kind of imagining that? No. So even after you're told that the sun is not rising and setting and that the earth is actually round, does the earth suddenly now become round? Do you perceive the world to be round?
I just intelligently know it, but I can't perceive it.
You intelligently, in other words, when you remove ignorance regarding an empirical reality, such as the world being flat, because you still see a flat earth, that's how the eyes are programmed to see, so that's not going to change. Only cognitively you come to see that it is actually not flat, it's round. But it still is perceived as exactly the same. So this means Vikshepa Shakti doesn't go away, it still remains the same. I just know the status of it to be Mithya.
Yeah, that's what my exact thing is, that the moment that there's a realization, that means the Avaran Shakti in my context, that is my avidya goes away.
Yeah.
I start seeing Ishvara's vikshep as mithya and see it as Brahm. Not see it, but know it as Brahm.
I would say that you start to see the whole world as manifestation of Ishvara, whose truth resolves into you, which is known to you right now as amness, as this common everyday presence that you are, which is Brahman. Okay? So in other words, you start to recognize that all that is here is Ishvara. This is the vision of the wise person. Because look at this. To say that all that is here is Brahman, what are you actually saying? What do we say about Brahman? It's attributeless. You can't see it. You can't objectify it. It is all-pervading. Everything is Brahman. So if I keep on saying all that is here is Brahman, 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 then what am I simultaneously doing? I'm objectifying it. Okay, I'm objectifying it into some object. So one step kind of more subtle is you can say all that is here is intelligence manifesting as this world. And the truth of that intelligence is Brahman, which is known to me right now as I am. Now, when I say Ishvara, am I excluding Brahman? No. When I say Brahman, am I excluding Ishvara?
No.
No. When I say tree, am I excluding Brahman or Ishvara? No. So in other words, all realities are here right now. I just have to cognitively recognize through and through all forms what they are. This is why we did the whole Satya Mithya teaching.
Can I ask two questions?
Yes, please.
Okay. So from what I can gather, it sounds like you're saying that ignorance is a lack of knowledge, not an actual thing. It's not something that exists. It's just that we haven't discovered knowledge yet.
Yeah, you could say
Yeah.
that ignorance is I am yet something is true, but I'm yet to discover that.
Okay. Right. Okay. Okay, I'll just so the question I had, it's a bit, I don't know if it's too out of topic, but I've studied Buddhism for a while, and this seemed like this is all quite familiar and very, very similar. So I was just wondering, generally speaking, like how is it different to Buddhism? I mean, there is a very traditional belief that there's an Atman in Hinduism, in Vedanta, and there's an Anatman in Buddhism.
Yeah.
But even that I don't really agree with, because there's things like the essential nature in Buddha in certain schools of Buddhism. So I was wondering on a deeper level whether you could speak to the differences or
Yeah. Okay. So Shunyavada in Buddhism, that's the basis of it.
yes.
We call it dependence of origination. So what that generally means is that anything you look, you can't really find a final building block of anything. Even these words that I'm saying now, one word is made up of how many letters? For example, the word tree, T-R-E-E, right? So the word itself is made up of many parts. The object, you break it down into molecules, into atoms, into particles, into many constituents that make up an object. So the basis of Buddhism is that it acknowledges right up front, you cannot find the final building block of anything, even the what they call the self. Now, the problem with Buddhism is, it's not a problem, it's just a difference. They call the word self, okay? Now, what Buddhism calls the self, we call ahamkara, or ego, I sense, okay? So now they will say that even the self is shunya, right? It's mithya. The equivalent word in Vedanta is mithya. Mithya. So mithya and shunya, they're equivalent words. That means you can't find the final building block of anything. It's resolvable, things within things, within things, within things, forms within forms, within forms, within forms. It just endlessly goes like that. Now, they will say then, this is where a lot of Advaita Vedantins get confused. They say, oh, you know, Buddhism is saying that there is no self. But you have to ask the question, what is the word self meaning in Buddhism? It does not mean in our language what we call Atma. It does not mean that. It specifically means ahamkara or ego. That's why Buddhism says that even the self or ahamkara in the Vedantic language is also mithya or shunyavada. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, so this you already know so far. Now, there's one extra component that Buddhism doesn't add, which Advaita Vedanta specifically adds, and it adds one more word, and that's called satyam. Satyam. And satyam is what we call awareness and consciousness. Now, again, I know you've heard awareness and consciousness in Buddhism also. When we use the word consciousness or awareness, again, that refers to what in Vedanta we call states of mind, or antahkarana. Antahkarana. Okay? So they will even say that consciousness is also shunyavada. Right? You've heard this.
Yes,
But
that's right.
consciousness specifically in Buddhism refers to antahkarana in Vedanta.
I see.
That's why even Advaita Vedantas will criticize Buddhism and say they're saying that consciousness is mithya or shunya, but it's actually satyam. But that's wrong, because even Advaita Vedantas don't know. Consciousness specifically refers to antahkarana. So in other words, we agree what Buddhism is saying there. But then Vedanta brings one more word, which is called consciousness. But what we really mean by consciousness is Atma. And that Atma is known to you as I am. And when I say I am, I'm not referring to ahamkara or ego.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the defining difference.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I've never heard it put it that way. And yeah, it's I think people who are sort of learning really need to understand these differences. And yeah, thanks. It's very helpful.
Yeah.
Andre, just
wait. So in other words, Buddhism is great. I think it's got a huge library of recognizing the mithya nature of the world, and it's really helpful. However, I'm going to say strictly, it doesn't stop there. You have to add one final building block, because if I'm just negating everything as mithya, then the question then comes, and it's an existential one. What am I standing on then? What is there to hold on to? So if you got nothing to hold on to, if you're not standing on anything, your life takes a toll. You become sort of a, potentially kind of like, what is there to look forward to? It takes kind of like, what is there, what glories, even the glories are mithya. What God, even God is mithya. So it produces a certain kind of a potentially complacent lifestyle, or desireless lifestyle, because desire is also mithya, remember, or everything's mithya. Therefore, Vedanta produces a lot of, a lot more compassion, and I mean, compassion is everywhere, but something to look forward to, something to stand on. And when I say something to stand on, it's not a belief, it's a living reality, which is called Atma or Brahman, which I already discussed in the prior sessions. Okay, so in summary, Buddhism talks about mithya, Vedanta as one more reality called Satyam. That's the huge difference.
what I got it from what you're saying is they stop one step short from Vedantic teaching. And when we say consciousness, we are referring to Brahman as consciousness. And when they say consciousness, they are referring to Antakaran, or can we say Chidabhas? They're referring to the reflected consciousness.
Yes. Next verse is then going to continue this thread and just mention a little bit more about what happens when I don't have this Vyavasayatmika Buddhi. Verse 44. Bhoga Ishwarya Prasaktanam Taya Pahrita Chetasam Vyavasayatmika Buddhihi Samadhau Navidhiyate.
For those who pursue pleasure and power exclusively, whose minds are robbed away by these flowery words, well-ascertained understanding does not take place in their mind.
Owing to the lack of Vyavasayatmika Buddhi, discerning thinking intellect, the disposition of an individual will be to ask for things that I can do. Like, give me some prayer, give me some technique, give me some method, and I'm going to do it. So in other words, no matter what you give, you are going to, kind of accept it because there's no thoughtfulness. You just sort of take it all up. Verse 45, Krishna will explain the real purpose of the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas. Traigunya Vishaya Vedaha Nistraigunya Bhavarjuna Nirdvandvo Nitya Sattvastaha Niryoga Kshema Atmavan.
The subject matter of the Vedas is related to the three variable qualities. Arjuna, be one who is free from the hold of these threefold qualities, from the sorrow of the pairs of opposites. Be one who is ever established in sattva guna, who is free from the anxieties of acquiring and protecting, and who is master of oneself.
So in the previous verse, 44, we've seen that due to the lack of Vyavasayatmika Buddhi, one will go on this endless hunt for techniques and, more things to chant and more things to do and more things to sort of intensify the practices for many more hours. And so when you go through this period, right, you come to a certain recognition that there has to be, it's not working. I'm not quite getting what I'm seeking. There's still that inner drive, that inner seek. And now, having come to that point, you're able to connect to the teaching. And this is where Krishna starts to get closer to mentioning how we convert from that non-discernment into discernment. So he says spirituality for most in the verse becomes a means of more power, higher gains, bigger sense of I, longer life, better births, better heavenly future. In other words, it becomes the stuff of the world. And he calls it Traigunya Vishaya. Traigunya Vishaya is the qualities of the world. It's just a model in the Vedic model. And the whole life becomes about organizing and manipulating and kind of, making your life about embellishing your life with these three qualities. And what happens here is that the mind starts to kind of wander between different goals because there's always more stuff to grab in the world, right? There's always more to optimize your mind to become, better, more loving, compassionate person. And even the process becomes about yoga, acquiring, and kshema, acquiring for more spiritual experiences, more, whatever, more. And when you acquire it, is it something that you just sort of let go or you protect it? You protect it. And how much effort does it take to protect things that you've acquired all your life? You get married, now you have to protect your marriage. You have to take care of it. And that is not easy, if we're honest. Every relationship is not easy. So yoga, acquiring things, experiences, or physical possessions or qualities, and then protecting them. However, the irony is you need to acquire and protect to gain a certain sattvic mind. Because if you don't acquire skills and talents, and you don't protect them, and you just let the world corrupt you, then it's going to, as someone says, it's going to blunt the knife. And a blunt knife cannot penetrate through the heart of the matter. Therefore, when it comes to Uttaramimamsa, understanding the final knowledge, then you need a sattvic mind. Now, what is a sattvic mind? This is the kind of a mind that we all want. A sattvic mind in general means one that is lucid about things. It doesn't get confused, and it's thoughtful. It's a thoughtful, inquirous mind. It has what we call straightforwardness. What is straightforwardness? In other words, in Sanskrit, we call this arjalam. It is lucid about what it wants. It communicates its needs. It's transparent about what you want. You say what you want, what you need, what is off track, and you follow up. So in other words, a person who has straightforwardness, they have a certain sense of integrity about them. Here's what I need, here's what's important to me, and then you follow up with what you said. And this way people can trust you and you can trust yourself. In other words, you don't violate your own words. For example, we say, I'm going to wake up early, and then next morning, we don't wake up early. Now you say, it's okay, there's no problem there. But actually, it violates that integrity within you. So in other words, it trains you to think one thing, but not follow up. It trains you to listen to class, but then not follow up in the real world. It's always a passover like that. So we need a certain straightforwardness, a directness, a simplicity in our character. A sattvic mind is also one that appreciates non-violence. Non-violence means having a alertness, a sensitivity, and a care behind your words. Every time the lips open, you're hearing your own words. No word passes without you hearing it. You know this experience where we speak, but we're not even hearing ourselves? So in other words, one slows down enough until they're able to capture what are these lips saying right now? Are they congruent with providing and accommodating and including the individual? Am I including myself? Am I including my well-being? Am I including your well-being right now? Or is it
Being mindful,
right?
being mindful.
Being mindful, alert, being conscious of the words that you're saying. So sometimes all it involves is just slowing down a little bit. Just slowing down a little bit so you can capture every word that's coming out of your lips. And it's quite amazing how different kind of words start to come out when you slow down. Okay, so this means that I have to, honor this non-violence, because it is not my world. It is Ishwara's world. And if I violate, then what happens? If I violate these rules, either there's guilt that you have to deal with, or there will be hurt. In other words, if you transgress someone's, well-being and they get angry, then they can sort of, hurt you. So you get hurt by your own words. Freedom from pairs of opposites, nirdvandva. Rather than having a formed opinion about something, you remain inquirous about a situation. For example, there's this tendency to say who is, liberated, like she's a master. But then you don't question yourself, what does it even mean to say he or she's a master? What does the word master mean? What makes up the word M-A-S-T-E-R? Like, who decides that? According to my own likes and dislikes, what makes up the word master? The mind doesn't think this. It just sort of master. That's it. Full stop. Next, non-master. Okay? So rather than putting these black or white labels onto people, onto experiences, you rather remain thoughtful and inquirous about anything that you think about. This makes you more composed, makes you more kind of sensitive to and more subtle in your thinking patterns. It makes you more equanimous towards emotional pain or emotional victory. Because even if it's victory, so what? Victory compared to what? You compare your victory to someone else's victory, your victory is no victory at all anymore. So we're only victorious when we sort of kind of, oh, it's my victory. What victory? Where? In this vast universe, where is victory? Of what? Tomorrow you wake up, you're the same person like today. There's also a certain composure towards physical discomforts. Why? Because are you ever experiencing in this world a perfect environment? No, that is a utopian dream. The world is not meant, this is not a place where perfection happens, at least not on earth. For that, you go to heaven. On earth, I do my work. The pairs of opposites, the heat and cold, the victory and the loss, the this and that is all byproduct of my work. Work for what? The only purushartha, which is moksha. Everything that comes along with that, that is just incidental byproducts. Nirdvandva, freedom from the pairs of opposites. What opposites? The whole thing is Ishvara, manifestation of Ishvara. What opposites? But also understanding the world is meant to give you opposites. That's just the nature of human experience. And therefore, we cannot avoid it. We cannot expect always good things to happen to us. It's just not realistic. Because of that, you have a certain resilience, a certain titiksha. Carrie likes the word, right? Titiksha, resilience towards things that are unpleasant. And if they're pleasant, wonderful. But understand this, you got a lot more years to live. Sattvic mind, doing the right things for the right reasons. Doing the right things for the right reasons. There's a story in Panchatantra, time for a story mode, right? It's called The Fisherman and the Three Fish. Now let's see what kind of a fish you want to be. The one fish is wise and proactive. You're a wise and proactive fish, or you can be an intelligent but reactive fish. Intelligent but reactive. And the third fish is a foolish fish. So what happened was the wise and proactive fish was fishing around and overheard the fishermen that they were going to come into their pond the next day and hunt for fish. So the wise and proactive fish got worried and naturally had a compulsion to return back and tell its other two friends that we have to leave immediately because we don't know, maybe the fishermen will fish us today. They may change their mind. So already, look at this, the wise and proactive fish is thinking one step ahead, is minimizing risk. Let's leave right now. Let's not wait for tomorrow because we don't know. What do the intelligent and reactive fish say? It says, oh, it's okay. Tomorrow when it comes, we'll figure something out. The foolish fish said, hey, whatever happens, whatever will be, will be. This is an intelligent statement that is not intelligent at all. You know, whatever will be, will be. Wow, he's so wise, you know. So next day, I mean, the wise and proactive fish, it's already left. It's already made a new home on that day. But the other two fish stood by and they were fished out the next day. The intelligent and reactive fish was thrown onto the riverbank and it somehow managed to pretend, because after all, it said that I will think of something when the time comes. And it did. It pretended to be dead. And when the fisherman wasn't looking, it jumped back into the pond and ran away. And the foolish fish, the one that says whatever will be, that fish was indeed fried up, was killed. Therefore, the question is now, what kind of a fish do you want to be? Do you want to be a wise and proactive fish? Proactive, that means the one that's always active, thinking, one step ahead. One that is intelligent, but reactive. That means I've got a little section of intelligence in my brain called Vedanta, but I'm still reacting in the real world just like any other person. That means it's not seeped, it's not percolated throughout my being. It's not come throughout my personality. There is more work to do. Or the fish that's sort of just the Tamasic fish, right? The one that says whatever will be, will be. So you got the Sattvic fish, the Rajasic fish, and the Tamasic fish. Therefore, then the question is, which fish do you want to be? Now, hopefully you are a fish that is wise and proactive, which is also the one that is emotionally mature. What does emotional maturity mean? It means that there are two options that we have for sometimes. Option one is I keep it inside and then I suddenly explode all at once. I was just watching on YouTube Indian weddings. I was just looking at some funny Indian weddings. And the guy was told, he just got married and he was told that they were being served a plate on the palm leaf, rice on the palm leaf. And he was told, no food for the unemployed one. He was not employed. And I mean, I felt bad for that. You know, you don't say that to a man who just got married. And he just sort of laughed, you know, ha, 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 ha. And just like that, out of nowhere, he throws the whole table into the air and just storms off. So I thought this is an example of you hold it all in, and then suddenly it's got nowhere else to go, and it just all comes out at once. The other option is where we hold it inside and we pretend like things are okay, but it just keeps on boiling, eating you from the inside, slowly, slowly, building resentment, growing up, you know, growing into something that's very uncomfortable. These two, and a Sattvic person recognizes them as neither good or bad, just emotional indicators. They're emotional indicators, they're feedback systems of Ishvara telling you, what stories am I telling myself right now about the situation? Where am I being triggered? And the fact that there is a trigger is indicating to me right now that there is something to work with as soon as possible. Why? Because you cannot access your unconscious mind. This is the deep-rooted notions that we cannot access. They're right now in us, but you cannot access them. You can only get a glimpse into your unconscious mind when you get triggered. So when I get triggered, when someone says something, or whoever, a child, a husband, a wife, or whoever, a son, right? A mom or a dad, the moment you feel that little, that pang, that knife, that is the window in the unconscious mind. And that is the perfect time to catch what triggered me and to reframe the story. What does this mean? What else could this mean? Because I'm clearly interpreting this in a way that is hurtful to me right now. What else could this mean in this moment? The moment you do that little step, you are accessing and rewiring that which the psychologists charge hundreds of dollars without any guarantee that they'll even access it. Because as I said, you can only access it when you actually get triggered. So this means karma yoga becomes a life of opportunity where every trigger, every anger, every little zap, that electrical bolt that comes, that is your chance to better yourself as a person. That is your chance to turn the muddy water and the wavy water into that clear, still water. Emotional management. They're just feedback indicators, no more, no less. That means I don't turn into a sentimental person, an emotionally unstable person, but I use that instability when I get triggered to let me know what do I need to work with. Okay. Now, so that is Sattvic disposition. What is Sattvic disposition? Straightforwardness, arjavam, non-injury, ahimsa, freedom from opposites, nirdvandva, doing the right things for the right reasons, and emotional maturity, Sattvic mind. A mind that is capable of capturing the knowledge and relating with it. Now, what is Rajasic quality, Rajasic mind? A Rajasic mind, it's like that wavy water, right? It is the kind of mind that thinks first and foremost what pleases me. The whole life becomes basically what will please me, what will satisfy those deep yearnings that I have, and how can I at all costs stay away from things that I don't like. So this means it becomes very selective in what it wants and what it doesn't want. And it can seem like a wise quality, doesn't it? But actually, if you show it, for example, Vedantic knowledge, it will say, I don't need this knowledge, I want this knowledge, just because I have a preference for this knowledge. So the cost of this mind is that you become quite selective, even of those things that are actually good for you. So we start to discard things, people in our lives that we actually need. We discard relationships that we actually need, because there's some part of us that doesn't like that relationship. But actually, that very relationship that you don't like could be quite healthy for you. Therefore, Rajasic disposition becomes self-centered. I'm looking for the fastest and the easiest ways to get things, to please myself, and to live a life where the whole thing is about my needs and my wants. So it becomes quite kind of a narrow, right, mirror, looking through a very narrow pipe. And you cannot see everything around you. You only see through the pipe of personal likes and dislikes. And when it comes to the knowledge, you become selective with what is it that you want to learn. So suppose I say to you, psychology is very helpful, like CBT that we explored generally, and it can help you a lot. And you say, no, I don't need that. Vedanta is much better. Really? Pause. What did I just say? What do I even mean? It's not good. Just think about it. Tamasic disposition is when we see adharma as dharma. We see what is non-ethical as ethical. There was I was watching, it's called Oxford Union on YouTube, where debates will happen between two sides. And some fella from Israel was asking how many people in this audience would put their hands up if you knew one day before that 7th of October would happen. How many of you would report it to the authorities so you can stop that event from happening? Only 15% of the audience put their hand up. Think about that. That means if they knew that that thing would happen, they would not report it. Most would not report it, 85%. So this is where adharma is seen as dharma. Now you just think about how many, this is just one example, how much this is prevalent in the world, where you know, in politics, for example. So I cannot see what is the right thing to do, and I call my own adharma as dharma. That's tamasic disposition. I hurt somebody and I think they deserve it. You deserve it because you had a past life where you did many bad things, so now you deserve to suffer. Pandu deserved to suffer. He deserved to be cursed by those two sages. Now, what else is tamasic? Tamasic is person is lazy. They don't want to think a lot. They have minimum effort in their investment in the knowledge. They just want to hear it, and they don't want to think very much about it. They just spoon feed me, please. Just spoon feed me. Just sort of look at something and puts the book away, no further investigation. Doesn't want to think about what is being said. It just there's some block that's going on. So if there's some block that's going on, what you have to do is you have to intentionally, through willpower, intercept that and say, let me give this one thought from different angles. An example of tamaguna disposition would be like this. Imagine I go up to you. Now just listen to this question and analyze it. This is where Vyavasayatmika Buddhi starts. Suppose I say to you, hey, why do I need the Bhagavad Gita? I'm already a good person. Why do I need the Bhagavad Gita? I am already a good person. I want you to think how many assumptions that I make in that one statement. Why do I need the Bhagavad Gita? I am already a good person.
There's a definition of good.
Good. In other words, I've already predefined what good means, as if I even know what good means. What else am I making in this assumption? Why do I need the Bhagavad Gita? I'm already a good person.
So he also makes an assumption he knows Bhagavad Gita.
Good. Okay. Anything else?
Also, he's identifying with himself. Why do I need you assume you know I.
Excellent. So this is the second part that I want to bring up. In other words, I've already decided that the end goal of the Bhagavad Gita is to be good. Which is not. The end goal of the Bhagavad Gita is to know the nature of I, which is the whole thing. So this means it's a very innocent question, but it slips right through our minds. This is tamasic definition. To close this verse, it wants to say that even though these three qualities of our personality that makes up our personality and makes up the world also, which I will look at a little bit later about the three gunas in reference to the world. This is the three gunas in reference to our personality. So even though we need all these three gunas. You need Rajaguna to have energy, to have some passion, to stay alert. You need Sattva guna for honesty, for clarity, for empathy, for discernment, for emotional management. You need Tamaguna, that laziness, for sleep. No Tamaguna, then how can you sleep, right? You need Tamaguna for that stability, to kind of put you down so you're not so ruffled and so agitated. You need all these gunas, but only for the sake of transcending the gunas. I need a sattvic mind only so that I can understand that this mind is pervaded by me, and your mind is also pervaded by me. Therefore, all of these three gunas become a means to an end to recognize that Atma, self, one reality, is lighting up the sattvic mind, is lighting up the Rajasic mind, is lighting up the lazy mind, the Tamasic mind. There is an I in a clear mind, there is an I in a agitated or a passionate mind, and there is an I in a lazy mind also. So all these three gunas become our dear friends to cherish, to use wisely so that we can transcend the identification with these three gunas. Okay? And the next verse will, I will do one more verse. It's a very short verse. It will reinforce that Sattva guna is indeed, it's a means to an end. So verse 46, Yavanartha udapane sarvataha sampluto dake tavan sarveshu vedeshu brahmanasya vijanataha.
For the Brahmana who knows the self, all the Vedas are of only such much use as a small reservoir is when there is flood everywhere.
It's using an analogy here. Suppose there is a well in a village, and we all together, we need to go to the village. We're in a village, and we need to go to that well to get the water. And that well becomes very precious because that's our only source of water. Now, one day, that village gets flooded, and now there's water everywhere. We no longer need the well because we got water everywhere. Do we now go and dismiss the well and say how the well is unimportant? Or we just look at the well over there and we recognize the well had its place, didn't it? It had its place while it had its place. It was a means to an end. Now that the water is everywhere, that we have gotten endlessly what we were needing so desperately, we can just relax. That well had its place. So now it uses this analogy and it says, just like the well, limited actions, which gave us limited results, had its place. Breathing patterns, prayer, meditation, whatever else you do for spirituality, all of it was like the well. It had its place. But when it finally gets your mind clear and the guru and the methodology comes into your life and you understand the final knowledge, then you look at that same practice that you were doing with so much passion and so much time and investment, and you appreciate and you recognize it had its place while it had its place. But I don't need to do it anymore. I can if I want to, but I don't need to do it anymore because it was just a means to an end. So in that same way, the verse says that while the individual was living, these three gunas had a huge role in your life. Yoga, asana, meditation, concentration, practices, wonderful. I thank the Lord for bringing all of those practices into my life. They were so useful. They were stepping stones. When they get you to the final knowledge, you can be thankful. You can be thankful they have done what they've done, but now I don't have to keep on doing them. I can redirect my focus and do something else. So therefore, they kind of lose their meaning as they once did. And so for this reason, you are now recognizing I am immortal. I am unborn, undivided, indestructible, eternal, all-pervading. I am that which nothing can top. So for that reason, no further action can add anything or any more value onto you because you are the whole thing. So for that reason, we are grateful, eternally grateful to Ishvara for delivering us all of the teachers and all of those experiences and all of those pains that got you to the place that you are in now. And by this, we can close. And next verse, we will discuss what is officially karma yoga, and it will become clear in the next session next week. Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.